It's my honor this evening to welcome our special guest speaker, Dr. Lisa Miller, who is the New York Times bestselling author of The Spiritual Child and a professor in the clinical psychology program at the Teachers College at Columbia University. She is the founder and director of the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute, the first Ivy League graduate program and research institute in spirituality and psychology, and has held over a decade of joint appointments in the Department of Psychiatry at Columbia University Medical School. Her innovative research has been widely published in more than 100 peer-reviewed articles in a number of leading journals. A graduate of Yale University and the University of Pennsylvania, where she earned her doctorate under the founder of positive psychology, Martin Seligman. She has served as principal investigator on multiple grant-funded research studies. Dr. Miller spoke here at Beth Am about 5 years ago, and her talk then sparked lots of wonderful conversations about the value of our spiritual community, particularly among parents. I've also discovered in reaching out to a number of Beth Am congregants in the past couple of weeks that when talking about Dr. Miller's talk tonight, that she has a number of connections to many of our members, actually, friends, I think at least one who goes all the way back to high school, colleagues, collaborators, and many, many fans of her work. Her recent book, The Awakened Brain, talks about how difficult experiences can actually help to strengthen our resiliency, and finding a connection to spirituality and faith in those moments only make us stronger. Which may sound familiar if you were paying attention to my High Holiday sermon a year ago. If it's not familiar, then the archives are there, but tonight's talk will be wonderful and refreshing. It is absolutely my pleasure and a delight to welcome her back here to Beth Am. So wonderful to have you here on our bima this evening. Let's see, is it on?
How about that? Can you hear me now? Okay, good. It's wonderful to be back. I was here 5 years ago, and I felt immediately part of the community. This was a beautiful Shabbat. Thank you, Rabbi. I'm sharing with you today as a clinical scientist, as a Jew, as a mother, what is perhaps not surprising to you as people committed to Jewish life. But there is indeed a science that mirrors that which our tradition has known for thousands of years. So certainly by no means would I say science proves spiritual life. It needs no proof in that sense. Direct knowing is indeed a form of evidence. But science is, amongst the many forms of knowing, one form of perception that mirrors that which you may have known in your heart. I'm going to stand for you in spirit, but I just had a hip replacement, so I'm going to sit with you in body. So very often I hear people say, I am very scientific. I don't believe in all that spirituality stuff. And then I'll hear other people say, I'm a deeply spiritual person. I don't care what science says. But it turns out that science and spirituality can go hand in hand. Science is a method. And it is really a very straightforward, rigorous method. The rollout is pretty straightforward. It is up to the scientists to take this lens, whether it's a microscope, a telescope, an MRI study, a genotyping study, take the lens and point it at a broad range of questions, but only really at the end of the 20th century did scientists start to ask, were they so inspired to wonder, what might be the impact of human lived spirituality on the rest of our lives? And it turns out that in all the clinical and social sciences, there's nothing that we have found as profoundly transforming of our lives as a strong personal spirituality. Round up the usual suspects. Is it parenting? Is it education? Is it this neighborhood or that? What is it that makes life good? And by a factor of 3 to 4-fold, there's nothing that compares to the impact of spiritual life. How much so? Well, we're honoring the B'nai Mitzvah launch and Jesse's Bar Mitzvah, Mazel Tov. It's beautiful. It turns out that science has a lot to say about the path of our spiritual life. The first is that every single one of us on earth is born with an innate capacity for spiritual life. We know this in science through the lens of twin studies. Twins raised together, twins raised apart, factor out their commonality as a function of genes and environment. Temperament, we all who have seen babies know that temperament is part hardwired. It's half hardwired, half environmentally molded. We can soothe a colicky baby, right? Sometimes. My center child, who asked to go by center child, was up for 18 months, and indeed I soothed her. The capacity through which we experience spiritual life is 1/3 innate and 2/3 environmentally formed. How is it formed? Right here now. Right here now. And nevermore is it more significant than in a surge, a biological clock, if you will, that goes off at puberty. We've known this in our tradition a long time. With puberty, there's a 50% increase in the heritable contribution, which means from the inside out, there is, ready or not, whether or not anyone told you, a hunger for transcendence, a questioning, what is my purpose? Actually, what is the purpose written into life itself? The quest to know ultimate significance, the existential longing, we are hardwired with puberty, and it only becomes more intense from 15 to 18 all the way to our early 20s. So what you are doing here, B'nai Mitzvah, is the most important thing you could possibly do onto your adult development. Judaism got ahead of the question. They said, right here, at the advent of puberty, we will show you a path. We will open the door, and it is yours for the rest of your life. When you wonder, what is my meaning? What is my purpose? What is the meaning, the purpose? You know how to pray. You know how to read. You know how to join in community to find what might have been the question of the head has an answer in the heart. Judaism got ahead of the game. And so too, we know through the lens of science that when we strengthen the spiritual core, we are 80% less likely to become addicted. American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, peer review, it is not an opinion, it is a fact on a national sample. 80% less likely to become addicted. 60% less likely to have major depression. Everyone gets depressed, but the downward spiral is cut off by a spiritual response to suffering. Judaism teaches us a lot, that where there's light, there's struggle, and where there's struggle, there's light. And science actually has mirrored that too. We've looked through MRI studies and seen that when we practice a spiritual response to suffering, the Kaddish, when we come together in love and care for each other when we're ill, bringing what that song was so beautifully about that you shared, love, love, love everywhere. We actually strengthen regions of the brain, the parietal, occipital, and precuneus. We have greater cortical thickness, processing power in these regions of perception, reflection, orientation, that are the very same regions that are not thick and strong, but thin when there is recurrent major depression. A spiritual response to suffering builds the muscle so that Bar Mitzvah and B'nai Mitzvah class, what you're doing here now strengthens you the rest of your life so that you know how to turn to God, so that you know how to turn to your Jewish community, so that you can turn to prayer in the most difficult moments of your life. Levador vador. We don't make the fire, but we carry it. Look who surrounds you, Jesse. It's so beautiful. Sorry, I'm not part of your family, but I feel this love. Levador Vador. It turns out that informing the spiritual core is not by picking up a book when we're 20, but it's actually in the lived spirituality coming and going in our lives. The mezuzah on the door, the modeling of our parents, and the forming of the spiritual child, there's an equal contribution of praying out loud by our parents' side, reading sacred text by our parents' side, transparency from our parents. You know, I had a hard time too, and I didn't know if there was any meaning in life. But then I felt God's presence, but then I saw the light in the leaves, but then you were born. And I knew there was something more. Right? Transparency is half from our parents, and the other half, not that they just talk the walk, but that they walk the walk. Lived Jewish values, spiritual values. So let's get back to the brain. Right? In the Awakened Brain, I share that no matter what faith tradition one is from, there's the same neuroseat of transcendent awareness. We know this through the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute, and our colleagues at Yale looked at people from all different traditions, Jews, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Catholics, and no matter what tradition we're from, when we're in a state of deep connection to God, the same neural correlates run in the functional MRI, the movie camera MRI tracking blood flow. What are they? There are 4. The first is that we quiet the racket. The next is that just as we were held as children in our parents' arms, the bonding network is engaged, and we perceive that we are held by life itself, by God. We move from a top-down to a bottom-up, from a dorsal to a ventral attention network where we see that life is full. And finally, the parietal puts in and out hard boundaries so that we know that as isolated and lonely and as real as loneliness can feel, we are part of a deeper oneness, the family of life. So when our innate, 1/3 heritable, 2/3 formed, awakened brain is engaged and we build that muscle, we know the rest of our lives, what you did here today, that we are loved, that we are held and guided, and that we are never alone. It is not a theory, it is not a belief, it is a perception. So I want to congratulate you, Mazel Tov. I want to say to the parents of the B'nai Mitzvah, you've done the best thing a parent can possibly do, which is build the spiritual core, strengthen the awakened brain, and no matter what comes, your child will always be prepared. Some people say the past 18 months it's been a loss, it's been a downtime, it's been a dark hole. But actually, the decades ahead, we don't know what they hold. And perhaps the most powerful education our children can have is how to lean into flux, how to lean into uncertainty and the unwanted, how to bring forward the deep spiritual awareness through which we don't control life and we're not makers of our paths, but we are in deep dynamic relationship with the spirit in and through life, and we discover our paths. And that is perhaps the greatest gift that you give your children, the B'nai Mitzvah class. Thank you for including me tonight.